Right, so hello everyone. This is going to be my last video in my Sony A9 experience series, and that's because I've just sent it away to be sold, because I did receive it back briefly and it did work a lot better than it did before, which was good. But it just, for me, and I'm just talking about me here, because I know there's going to be people out there that absolutely love the A9 for their purposes, but for what I wanted to use it for, it just didn't really deliver on what I was hoping I'd be able to use it for. And I do feel that I was misled a little bit by some YouTube videos out there. Certainly using an A9 to capture a dog running towards him. You set the camera tracking mode it wide, the camera picked the dog up, and he literally got 20 frames per second in focus as the dog was running towards him. Yes, he was probably using a 70-200 f2.8 GM master lens, but I did do a lot of research, and I did think that the lens that I bought, the well-renowned or the well-regarded 85mm f1.8 lens, would have given me similar kinds of results. And I'm sure it might do for some people out there, depending on their type of dog. But for my type of dog, which is quite a small and dark dog with potentially hard to see eyes, the camera really did struggle to pick her up. I didn't have any success with setting the camera to wide tracking. Zone tracking was really hit and miss as well. The camera tended to focus on the grass rather than the dog, even though the subject detection was set to animal. So the whole experience since I've owned the camera, which has been about 5 months now, has been a little bit frustrating. I was getting good results when I used the expandable, flexible spots on my dog running towards me, but then that kind of goes against what I thought this camera would do for me, because I got good results with my other cameras when I used similar spots, putting on the dog and then using the camera to track the dog moving through the scene. Whereas I thought with this camera, the whole idea of it is you just set it to wide tracking, set it to animal subject detect, and then when it detects a dog or an animal in the scene, it would track it and then keep it in focus for as long as you needed it to track. And yeah, I just didn't really have the results I was expecting, and I just felt that my other cameras that I've used were just as good for putting a spot on the dog, setting it to continual autofocus and bursts, and then yeah, it would just track it just as well from my experience. And I think the last few times I tried with the Sony A9, it did miss that decisive moment in the sequence of runs that I was hoping it would capture, and that was kind of the final nail in the coffin for me for that particular camera. If I just can't rely on it for the shots that I want, then really there's no point having it. And I think as well, like I know now that it's within my budget, I'm probably not going to be able to get a camera that's going to do better. So I'm probably resigned to the fact that I'm going to have to do a bit more work myself in terms of keeping like a focus area on my dog and then track her as she's coming towards me, or just do what other photographers do and set up traps so that when the dog comes through the plane of focus that you've set, that's when to initiate a burst in order to capture the decisive moment that you're aiming for in that situation. So ultimately the autofocus was the main reason that I'm returning the Sony that I'm selling the camera on. And like I said, this is just my experience. I'm sure this camera does perform well for other people, and certainly when I've used it to track like bigger, slower moving animals, it's done an admirable job. But just for the specific reason that I bought the camera for in the first place, which was to track my dog running towards me, I just think it fails miserably with that particular scenario. So that's the main reason that I'm moving the A9 on. I thought I'd just talk now perhaps about some of the other things that started to grate with using the Sony system. And also as well, I'll touch on some of the things that I did think the Sony A9 was good at. So obviously this isn't my first Sony. I did have the Sony A7S briefly before it, which was great because I bought it for a small full frame camera that I could adapt my vintage lenses to, and it gave me great results. So I was really hoping that the Sony A9 and the Sony system would have been a great one camera full frame solution for me. It's coming off the back of my decision to move away from micro four thirds. Right, so I think the three distinct negatives, other than the autofocus system for my particular test case, was the fact that the Sony A7S didn't have any in-body stabilization, whereas the Sony A9 obviously does say it does have some, but to be honest, I found it pretty much useless compared to my old Olympus cameras. Even my old Olympus M1 I felt had better in-body stabilization than the one in the Sony A9. And even when I had tried some lenses with lens stabilization as well, even that in conjunction with the in-body stabilization didn't really make much of a difference in my opinion. Yeah, it's hard to explain why, but I just didn't feel that I could switch between different shooting modes as quick as some of the other cameras that I've used in the past. I just found that I tended to have to dive into the function menu just to see and check that the settings were suitable for the scenario that I wanted to capture. Whereas I know, like on other systems that I've used, certainly the Olympus system with its custom mode implementation, it's very quick just to change from like an action shooting configuration to one which is more static, so to speak. So yeah, I just didn't feel generally confident in the Sony's ability to match the performance of my other cameras in that regard. Another negative as well is, even though I did put this as a positive when I was looking at reasons for why to go to the Sony system, but I found the lens selection to be a bit of a blessing and a curse really, and it probably comes down to what I'm willing to spend on lenses. So that pretty much wiped out a lot of the higher end Sony lenses from my list of lenses to go for. Like certainly, like I would have loved to try the Sony 20-70 f4 lens, but it just seems to be quite expensive for what it is, considering it's an f4 lens. And I didn't really look at a lot of Sigma lenses because I felt that they were quite heavy and quite expensive, and they seem to have quite a few compromises. Like I would have definitely got the 28-70 f2.8 if it had better weather sealing. It just seemed a little bit crippled in that regard. For a fast, decent performing lens, I would have expected to have better weather sealing than it did. So that's why I didn't tend to go with Sigma. And there was just something about the Tamron lenses I was just a little bit nervous with, I guess. I did go for the before I returned the camera because it was broke. I did buy the Tamron 20-40 f2.8, which I did enjoy using, but I often found that I needed longer than 40mm, and even though that's a good thing with a Sony and with full frame cameras in general, you have got that APS-C mode on them now, where you can basically, the 20-40 becomes a 20-60. Obviously you're sacrificing some resolution when you do that, but it is definitely a good feature to have than not when you needed a bit more reach. I also tried the Sony 24-70 f4 again because it was quite a lot cheaper compared to the newer 20-70 f4, but I returned that because at the time I thought I was having lens variation issues, where with the Tamron and with the Sony, but it ended up being a camera fault. But besides those lenses, there wasn't really a lot of other lenses I fancied trying, because they seem to be, to me, quite heavy. And it's probably because I've come from Micro Four Thirds, so maybe I haven't got into the full frame mindset yet, in the fact that lenses are going to be bigger, heavier, and as such more glass and more expensive. Yeah, so maybe it was just a bit of unrealistic expectations on my part, but I did struggle to determine what lens I would have bought next. I think, as well as a negative, I obviously use the camera quite a lot, and I just didn't really gel with it. You know, like, I know people say that it's not about the gear, but I feel that you've got to be comfortable with the gear that you use. And there was just something about the Sony, but I just didn't really get on with the A9. So yeah, like after a while it fitted okay in the hand. The menu systems were absolutely horrible, you know, and this is coming from like the older Olympus systems, but I really didn't get on with the menus at all in the Sony system, because a lot of the menu selections, it wasn't really intuitive to know what they meant and what effect their change would have on your shooting experience. So yeah, I think that's all the negatives I can think of at the moment. Right, so let's talk about some positives that I do have to give the Sony and the Sony system credit for. I think one of those is definitely battery life. The battery life in the Sony A9 is absolutely amazing. Like, I did a day event a couple of weeks back, and I was a little bit worried in the fact that I only had one battery for the Sony A9, but I took over 500 images on that day, and I was using it quite extensively, and I still had about 30-40% battery life left at the end of the day. So I was mighty impressed at how long the battery lasted in that camera. Right, so another positive for the Sony A9 was the fact that it had a traditional flip down screen rather than a fully articulating screen. I much prefer that type of articulating screen, because you're kind of shooting in the plane of the camera, whereas if the screen is out to one side, I do find it a little bit awkward to frame my shots. But to be fair, I did get used to using it on the Olympus EM1 Mark II, certainly for shots of like my dog running towards me, whereas I just tended to use the camera in the vertical orientation, and that seemed to allow me then to use the LCD screen again in that kind of same plane as the camera, and that made it a lot easier. I did find the autofocus to work really well when I was shooting larger, slower moving things, and certainly when I did the odd bits of wildlife photography, you could literally see the camera in wide tracking area pick up the bird in the screen, which was absolutely amazing. So that's why I really kind of struggled to understand why I wasn't doing the same for my dog running towards me. Like, I must have shot over 3,000 images in the time that I had the camera, all on the electronic shutter with the excellent blackout free viewfinder. And it wasn't really until the dog was almost past the minimum focus distance of the lens that the camera then detected the dog's eye. It didn't even detect the face. It was always relying on the focus area that I had dialed into the camera. It never, that I saw, picked up the face or the body of the dog. Only the eye when it was too late. So, but in terms of birds, it picked them up a million miles away. So it was, it was just bizarre. And like I said, it did do really well at slower moving animals even though I didn't detect them again, I still had to use the focus area and continuous autofocus to track the subjects that I wanted to track. And again, I've already touched on it. I did like the APS-C mode. It just gives you that bit of extra reach if you needed it. And one good thing with the A9 over the A7S I found is that when I bought another Sigma MC11 adapter, my Canon EF lenses did work a lot better on the A9. They were almost native in their performance, which made for me lens selection difficult, because I've got a great Canon 28-105 f3.5 to f4.5. It literally cost me, I think, 60 quid, and that outperforms all of the other lenses bar the 85mm 1.8 lens that I tried. And then I guess that is what made deciding what standard lens to get more difficult, because I knew that the Canon EF lens gave me a great range. But of course, because it was great for static images, but I couldn't use that lens for moving subjects, because it's obviously an old lens and its focus motors were not up to the job. One thing I'd probably comment on is, I know the videos that I watched, certainly from the ones the Mark Gaylor posted, is that he was using an older firmware on the camera before the last firmware that Sony introduced for this camera, which introduced the real-time animal eye autofocus. And when I've done some subsequent research, there are some reports that people were saying that changed things, and focusing was better before they did that. But obviously, I've got the latest firmware and you can't downgrade, so it's not something that I could easily test. Oh well. I do want to say that I literally tried probably every combination of settings in the camera, from locked on to responsive, autofocus mode, as well as all the different tracking focus areas, and I didn't really get any more consistent results. Like, I think overall my hit rate was probably down at around 50% on average for like a sequence of shots where my dog was coming towards me, and that's probably, like I said earlier, no better than when I used my Olympus EM 1.2 and even the Fujifilm X-H1. Even though actually I get the benefit of full frame, larger sensor, more light, so I definitely found that the ISO, it doesn't go up as quick as it does with my crop sensor cameras. But then when it did go up, I didn't really feel that the noise performance was that much better than certainly the Fujifilm. And I think that's probably due to the A9 having like the stack sensor configuration, in that there's something had to give somewhere, and I think it didn't have the full frame benefits that are present in other cameras in terms of high ISO performance. So certainly it would be nice to get a bit more higher ISO performance in the next full frame camera that I try. So I think I'll just leave this video with a selection of my favourite images that I did manage to capture on the Sony A9. So as always, thanks for watching. Bye for now.